To AP Biology. Today we're talking about speciation, which is how species are formed. So there are a couple of different ways that we think about speciation. One is allopatric speciation, and this is just what you probably already think of. You just might not know the vocab word for it. That's when populations are separated by some type of geographical barrier. So maybe islands, rivers, mountains. So for example, here's an area, and let's say there's some, I don't know, maybe some snakes that live here. And so over time, maybe a river got diverted, and then that river, over a long period of time, produced this deep division between the land. And so the snakes over here can't interact with the snakes over here, right? So you might think that the selective pressures might be a little bit different between the two places. You know, maybe on this side there's a mountain and this is a valley, and it's possible that it's pretty cold on this side compared to this side in terms of it doesn't look that far apart, but let's say there's a valley right here, and there are some mice that live maybe down here in the wintertime, and maybe they come up here in the spring, but they can't quite get through the gorge there. And so maybe there's more food over here, right? So maybe over here the ground is a little bit sandier, and there's a mountain up this way, and whoops, and so there's just less food over here. So you can imagine the selective pressures are a little bit different on the two sides, and also just random mutation. There might be some random mutations that occur. Wow, sorry. There might be some random mutations that occur on one side, but not the other side. So that can be another thing that happens. And also, the two populations can't breed with each other. So you might think that over a long period of time, if there are different selective pressures and different mutations, and they can't mate with each other, that maybe one side develops into a different species compared to the other. And even if there's maybe the river dries out and maybe there's an earthquake or something that brings them together, the snakes over here, when they got together with their long lost cousins, they wouldn't be able to reproduce because they had just become that different over time. So it could be the island organisms compared to the mainland or other islands. Could be that there's a river separating them. It could be deer or mice or something on one side of a mountain compared to the other. Sometimes something as simple as a new highway can separate out frogs um, from one side of the highway to the other. So that's called allopatric speciation, where almost you can think they're not even allowed to get near each other. Okay, another type of speciation that is a lot more difficult to imagine is sympatric speciation. So with sympatric speciation, think we're on the same spot. So they become reproductively isolated, meaning they can't mate with each other, even though they're all in the same spot. So it's a change in niche, meaning a job, what they do. And so here's what I want you to imagine. There's the native hawthorn fruit, and there are fruit flies who like to eat this. The skin's a little bit thinner, and flies with thinner mandibles do fine here, and they tend to mate with the other folks who are around there. I guess they don't fly too far away to mate. And then there's this imported apple that maybe came to this country, I don't know, maybe like 400 years ago, let's say. And they have a little bit of thicker skin, and so you can imagine the flies that eat them will have to have bigger mandibles, and they tend to mate with the other flies that are hanging out in the same place, eating the same apples. And you can imagine, possibly, if this one got together with that one, because they're really not so far apart, right? So if they got together, maybe their babies would have medium-sized mandibles, and they wouldn't be super good at eating the thicker skinned fruit, and they wouldn't be really as efficient as the thin ones because they had to put so much energy into the bigger mandibles. So the babies, the hybrid between these two, might not be as successful as the ones who just mated with the others that were in the same location, like the exact same niche, right? So if these mate with these, they do better, and if these mate with these, the babies do better. So there's a term that I haven't actually defined for you yet called gene flow. This is the genetic exchange between populations. So meaning, does this one get over here to mate with this one? So the gene flow has been reduced, meaning the bugs over here don't mate with the bugs over here. And so the gene flow or the mating has been reduced between the flies that feed on different food varieties, even though they live like kind of in the same area. So that's sympatric speciation, meaning it develops in the same place, just different jobs or different niches. Any behaviors that keep the populations from mating with each other would be selected for, because individuals with medium mandibles wouldn't be able to survive and reproduce, as well as the flies with either the large mandibles or the small mandibles. So what I mean by any behaviors, maybe the females here are looking for a male fruit fly with little mandibles. They think they're cute. And also maybe these males, let's say they do a little dance and they buzz their wings just so. If they do anything special that these don't do, and the females pick up on that and mate selectively with them for that trait, that's going to be selected for. The females who can't distinguish between the males with their little buzz fly with the way they dance, they would be less fit than the females who could pick out the males who have the small mandibles. And same thing with the flies over here. Maybe I shouldn't cross them out now, right? Because they're okay together. Okay, so let's say that this is a male fly. I don't know how you tell whose, but let's say he gets very, very still when he wants to mate and he just like stands there and waits for the female. Well, if she encounters one of the males over here and he does a little dance, she's going to be like, ooh, I don't think so. And then once she finds a guy who stands very still, that would be a behavior. And if she is able to recognize that behavior and like it and want to mate with him, that would be a behavior that would be selected for. So really complex stuff going on here. Okay, the next one is parapatric speciation. And so this results from a partial separation of two species. So here we have the Bullock's oriole and here we have the Baltimore oriole. And they almost live in separate areas of the world, right? This is the United States, and the Bullock's oriole is mostly in the west, and Baltimore oriole is in the east to the middle here. And so maybe the Baltimore oriole, if we didn't have this space right here, then this would be allopatric speciation because they're apart. But we do have the space where they're together. So in this area right here, they're both there. And so for this little space, it's really more like sympatric speciation. And so what you have is the populations overlap occasionally, but there's some kind of behavior or some mechanism that decreases the interbreeding. So maybe if she mates with him, maybe her babies are not as successful. So if she instead mates with this one, hey, so if she mates with this one, her babies are more likely to survive and reproduce because maybe something about their longer beak makes them more successful in this area. And so anything that would help her to be more likely to mate with him is going to be selected for. So maybe she prefers the males with a little bit orange, more orange coat or a little bit blacker wings. Maybe she thinks they're cuter. And the females here who think that the lighter colored ones are adorable or their dance is adorable or whatever, their babies are going to be less successful. So that is going to be selected against. And of course, the same would be true here. So this female, maybe she really prefers the males with the lighter color wings or the sort of not quite so orange feathers, or the one without like the black line here behind their eye. So if she were more attracted to this guy, the babies would be less successful, and so that would be selected against. So any of these females who kind of think these are the cuter birds are going to be selected for. So it's really very similar to sympatric speciation. Okay, so if the hybrids had reduced success or reduced fitness just means that the babies, if they're born, are not as good at getting food or not as good at getting mates, and they're less likely to make babies. So the hybrids are less successful. So any behaviors or mechanisms that keep these populations apart is going to be selected for. So if this one mates with this one, they're going to have fewer grandbabies. Okay, so how does that work? There are these things called isolating mechanisms or reproductive isolating mechanisms. And to be isolated means you're alone. So in this case, an isolating mechanism is something that keeps you isolated or away from the other population. So there would be a reproductive isolating mechanism to keep these birds from mating with these birds. And again, maybe it's this female decide, or maybe the females who like the birds with the lighter feathers, or the more the lighter colored face here, that would be selected for. That would keep them. That would keep this population, the Bullock's oriole, reproductively isolated, more or less, from the Baltimore oriole.